Hello again to everybody who just logged on. We're going to begin the webinar now. Welcome and thank you for logging into the webinar today. My name is TJ Cantwell and I'm the Executive Director at the NCCCO Foundation. At the NCCCO Foundation, we are working to improve the crane industry for everyone working in load handling field by enhancing safety through research, education, and workforce development programs. You can learn more about the Foundation programs, safety tools, research reports, and future webinars at www.ncccofoundation.org. Today's webinar is Raising the Bar, the Real Impact of Crane Certification and Training on Safety. During our webinar, our speakers will share findings and recommendations from our new safety research report, as well as provide advice on instituting a quality crane training and certification program. I'll be acting as the moderator. We'll conduct a Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. So if you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to type them in the Q&A section, the box using Zoom, and we will address as many as possible at the end. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded so that we can share it with others. Before we start, I want to provide a brief introduction to our great speakers. First, Kenna Stanley is a research manager with the National Safety Council's Work to Zero initiative, specializing in the application of a technology in the workplace, risk mitigation practices, and workplace violence prevention. Prior to joining the council, Kenna served as a research consultant for leading Fortune 500 retail organizations, exploring the role of technology in crime prevention, workplace safety, and security. Kenna holds a master's degree from the University of Florida and currently resides outside of Gainesville, Florida. Next, Matt Bowen is the safety director at ABC Supply. Matt focuses on helping organizations create safer workplaces through effective training, certification, and employee engagement. Matt has worked extensively with crane operator certification programs and safety leadership initiatives, and he believes that certification is most valuable when it is integrated into a broader safety culture that empowers employees to make safe decisions every day. Welcome, and on behalf of myself and our audience, I want to thank both of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be with us today. So now let's jump right into it. I know there's a lot to talk about. Kenna?
Thank you so much, TJ. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. As TJ mentioned, my name is Kenna. I'm a research manager with the National Safety Council. If you are not familiar with the National Safety Council, it is the leading safety nonprofit in the United States. So we have offerings from trainings and research like you're going to see today, to things like consulting services, a lot of events and opportunities to sort of get together with fellow practitioners and talk about some of the emerging issues in safety. NSC has been fortunate enough to have been partnered with the foundation since about 2022, 2023. And in that time, we've produced quite a few reports and online tools that are really designed to push the needle on crane safety. So we've done some extensive research trying to understand what are some of the top hazards facing our crane personnel, taking a deep dive on some of the technology solutions out there, and looking more specifically at some of the hazards like heat stress. We recently partnered back in 2025 to continue our research, and we sort of tackled this through two key areas. The first that you're going to hear about today is our paper on the impact of certification on crane safety. So we know intuitively, I think, that certification does make an impact, right? Training, knowledge, and education are all key to being able to perform safely in your jobs. But what we really wanted to understand is how much is formal certification improving safety? Is it making a difference on things like efficiency and job outcomes? What do personnel think of certification versus experience? And sort of what is the balance between those two things? And then the second report, which is going to be released in about a month, is about the current state of rigging and signaling. So we kind of take a step beyond that to look at current rigging and signaling practices, to understand what are best practices that employers are using, what are challenges, and where are there opportunities to improve the safety for both of those roles specifically. So really excited to be here and to talk about this topic. And I want to take a step back just to kind of review why is it that we actually care about this topic. If I can get my slides to move forward. So what we are finding And TJ, I'm having some issues advancing the slides. Do you think you can try on your end? Awesome. Thank you. I'll just go next slide. So in the last decade, cranes were a primary secondary cause of injury in about 405 fatalities, or roughly 41 per year. So this comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So we're seeing about 41 fatal incidents every single year. This does not account for injuries, serious injuries, minor injuries. And we also know that operators only account for about 29% of fatalities overall. So this is kind of highlighting that the risk associated with crane operations isn't necessarily just to the operator itself, right? It may not just be to the rigger or the signal person, but to any laborers who are in or around that area. So not only impacting those personnel, but really impacting safety across the job site. There are, and as I'm sure you are all aware, a slew of different causes that can cause crane incidents, right? So things from electrocution to struck by incidents, crushing, fall from height. All of these things are leading causes of fatalities that we are seeing in these incidents. But another area that we like to focus in on are what are actually contributing to those proximal causes. So things like heat stress, fatigue or distraction, inadequate site planning, poor work site culture and supervision that I know Matt is going to be touching on is how important that culture is. Communication breakdowns can all make an impact. All of these things are influencing not only crane safety, but influencing how effective certification can also be in its application in these sorts of operations. And TJ, you can go to the next slide. And I also wanted to provide some historical context because it's going to be kind of important to some of the research questions that we have. So since about the early to mid 1990s, there has been a lot of advances in crane safety. So starting in the 90s, there was really more increased awareness and enforcement of those existing OSHA standards. We saw the foundation of the NCCCO in 1996. There was a really, really strong movement towards formal operator training and certification even before it became mandatory. And there were also just improvements in load charts and in some technological advancements. But the one I really want to talk about is that 2010 cranes and derricks and construction rule, because that was sort of the baseline of a lot of the questions that we were asking. So that 2010 rule was really the most comprehensive update to crane safety in over 40 years. It did a lot of different things. It addressed issues around ground stability, assembly and disassembly, added some new regulations and requirements around crane safety. And it also mandated certification for operators. So in 2010, that was when operators were first required to have a formal certification. That rule kind of got pushed and revised, and then it became finalized in 2018. So there was sort of those 7, 8 years between 2010 and 2018 where it was kind of being applied, but wasn't mandated through OSHA quite yet. And TJ, you can go to the next slide. So we wanted to know first, did that make a difference? So we did that through a data analysis of that Bureau of Labor Statistics data and really tried to determine, did that 2010 OSHA rule make a clear causal difference? From there, we also just wanted to understand, what does the research say about certification, not only in crane operations, but what about other industries or other, sorts of operations? We wanted to gather industry perceptions as well. So we had the opportunity to survey over 300 crane personnel. So we sampled workers who are currently involved in operations, and we distributed this through the CCO mailing list, through our own NSC communities, through LinkedIn. So really trying to reach a broad audience of those involved in crane operations. And then I had the opportunity to also talk to some folks one-on-one and try to get a little bit more information about some of the results that we were finding. And TJ, you can go to the next slide. So the survey demographics, the vast majority were operators. So about 71% were crane operators. 10% were site or lift supervisors, 6% were riggers, about 5% were safety managers, and then the remaining were signal persons. So just to kind of give you a little bit of a breakdown about who was actually involved in the sample. Something I'd like to note is that the sample that we received were highly experienced and very, very skilled in this area. So 72% held 2 or more certifications. Over 70% had over 10 years of experience in the field. And 3/4 had worked in the crane industry before 2018, so before that OSHA rule had become finalized. So we were able to ask a little bit more detailed questions about differences before and after that rule. A vast majority of these were in construction. Also had some folks from utilities, manufacturing, some who do crane rental services, some in city and municipality. So a good sort of mix of industries, but again, vast majority did come from construction. Not surprising. And TJ, we'll go to the next slide. So there were quite a few questions that we were trying to address, all of which revolve around what is the purpose and how effective is certification as it exists now. So first place that I start as a researcher is what have other researchers found? So frankly, what we know is pretty limited in terms of certification. A lot of the research that I found tends to use training as a proxy. So it will be training and certification and qualification. So sort of grouping all of those things together. There have been a couple studies that look specifically at crane certification. So there was one article that came out in 2007 where Ontario saw about an 81% reduction in fatalities following mandatory and government-backed training and licensing for operators. So a little bit different than certification, but I think comparable in that it was, a sort of standardized, mandated form of training. California also saw pretty significant reductions in fatalities and injuries, about 80% and 57% respectively, following mandatory operator certification. And that report came out in 2008. So we are seeing some pretty positive evidence coming out of some areas that are showing that certification and licensing can be impactful on safety. What we know is from that research, there are a couple different reasons why certification is, kind of considered the gold standard. The first is that, of course, training can help you increase your knowledge retention, right? We've seen links to, again, training, certification, and qualification kind of all lumped together. But we've seen associations between more training and increased knowledge, safer practices, improved hazard recognition, improved safety culture, and reductions in workplace injuries. So we know, obviously there is something behind training. There's something behind certification. So we wanted to take all this great information and then take it a step further. We know that training has its benefits. What are the differences in that and certification? How can we tease those out? And what is the impact on personnel? And TJ, you can go to the next slide. What we also know is training is effective, but training is really only as effective as the person or the organization who is delivering that training. So standardization of training and qualification is really a key challenge, especially for certain positions in crane operations. Think of your riggers and your signal people. Really, their only requirement is to be qualified by their employer, which can be a pretty broad sort of requirement, right? So something that came out through the research was there was a lot of discrepancy in what qualified actually meant between employers. Some respondents said that it was, a few days in a classroom and doing really applied on-the-job training. Others said that it was just a couple hours before they were, put on the field and ready to start their work. So standardization is really a challenge. There are also a lot of factors that go into how someone's going to experience training: age, prior experience, language and literacy levels, the type of employee, if they're a contractor, if they're full-time with your organization, if they're a day laborer. And of course, different learning styles, right? So some people learn through reading and writing. Some people learn through on-the-job experience. And I think that was one area where certification kind of shined in the research, is that it's especially the CCO qualification and some of the certifications associated with crane operations do try to really address it through these different sorts of delivery mechanisms, right? So it's not just a written-based exam, but it's got some of that on-the-job experience, that ability to go on, to try things, to do simulated exercises, to engage with the equipment before they're going to move on. But really, we know that training, qualification, and certification are very diverse in terms of what sorts of engagement they're using, how they're delivering it, and how people are responding to it. And TJ, you can go to the next slide. The next thing we wanted to learn was, did that 2010 OSHA rule contribute to declining fatalities? So I did some statistical testing. I had 26 years of data from 1997 to about 2024. And what I wanted to learn was, after that 2010 rule was put into place, was there a significant difference in the amount of fatalities directly after that rule? And was there a difference in the decline in fatalities long term? So as you can kind of see from this graph, fatalities in crane operations have been falling pretty consistently since the 90s. About 4% year over year is the reduction that we're seeing. So unfortunately, because of the small amount of fatalities that we had to work with, the limited amount of data, we weren't able to establish a clear causal link that says, yes, this 2010 rule definitely caused declines 2011 onward. But what we can say is that these declines are very, very likely a result of sort of employer pushes in safety, and OSHA kind of lagging behind those improvements. What we know is that OSHA is slow, government is slow, regulations are slow. They often lag behind where the employer mindset is. So, just like now, things like building up a strong culture are not necessarily mandated through OSHA. We're seeing a lot of heavy movement of employers toward, trying to create those cultures. So rather than saying that it definitely caused a decline in fatalities, I think what we can say is that the employer push toward more certification and toward these improvements in safety have really caused those reductions since the 90s. And TJ, can go to the next slide. We also tried to tackle this question in sort of a different way. So we had sent out this survey to operators, riggers, and other personnel, and we wanted to know, what were the outcomes after mandatory operator certification? So after it was finalized in 2018, what were the outcomes? Again, we had a really fantastic sample. Over 75% were in operations before 2018. So they had a really, really good sort of pre and post view on this rule. And in general, what we found was most respondents in this sample found that job site safety, frequency of incidents, frequency of near misses, competence, and efficiency had all seen improvements after that 2018 rule. So after mandatory operator certification was formally put into place and required. The numbers range from 59 to 69%, but over half are indicating that it has improved, with the second majority saying that there was really no change. So overall, pretty positive, I think, perceptions of that rule and of that certification mandate. But I think even the fact that there was no change is also a very positive thing that we can also look at, is that we're not seeing declines in safety. We're not seeing declines in incidents. But that was one area where we also wanted to hone in and understand, okay, what has improved, what stayed the same, and where can we continue to move forward? And TJ, can we go to the next slide? So next we wanted to understand broad perceptions of certification in the field. So currently operators are required to be certified. As I mentioned, riggers and signal persons are only required to be qualified through their employer. So we wanted to understand what are people's interpretations of certification for those roles? Do they support it? Do they not support it? Why or why not? So overall, industry support was very, very strong. 91% agreed that working with certified personnel across the board improves site safety and career prospects, and 85% believe it can reduce near misses, incidents, and delays. Again, those are perceptions of those operators and site supervisors and other roles. But that support also extends just beyond operators as well. So support was strongest for rigor certification, where there is a little bit more sort of technical expertise and skill that needs to be learned beforehand. So we asked respondents to rate the effectiveness of certified versus non-certified riggers across different tasks. These were aligned with the ASME B30 requirements for those roles. And really what we were trying to determine is, are certified personnel more or less effective, or are they about the same? And across the board, from proper selection and use of hardware to use of slings to the effect of sling angles on rigging loads, we saw that perceptions in this case strongly supported certified riggers. So I believe the percentages were anywhere from 85 to about 78%, where 85% rated certified personnel as more knowledgeable and 80% said that they help improve lift safety. So strong support for rigor certification. Support for signal person certification was also largely positive from the sample. So 80% rated certified signal persons as more knowledgeable in their job and in their responsibilities. And 76% said that employing certified signal persons could help improve lift safety. So across the board, strong support. But something else I wanted to notice is that the individuals in those roles themselves also largely supported certification for their own role. So 86% of respondents who hold a rigger position support certification for riggers. But interestingly, that number was a little bit lower for signal persons. So about 60% of signal persons support certification for their own role. Across the board for operators, managers, and different personnel, it was about 72%. So about 72% support certification for both roles. So pretty strong support overall. And TJ, you can go to the next slide. Again, this sort of just reiterates that point, but these represent attitudes toward working with certified crane personnel. And again, 84 to 91% either agree or strongly agree that working with certified personnel improves safety, competence, site efficiency, near misses, and career prospects, which I think is one area that we can focus on as we're talking about certification and the benefits of certification to make that key argument to those we're trying to recruit, right? A lot of the feedback that I had gotten in my interviews was that more and more job sites and employers are looking for certified individuals. That may be true just for those individuals, but we are seeing some increased preference toward those who are certified versus uncertified. So could be a great way to sort of position that as we're making the argument towards those we're trying to recruit as well. And TJ?
Yeah, no, we're seeing this in our business a lot lately, particularly with data centers coming up and on commercial job sites where there in the past there have been safety incidents and accidents. that the requirements set by the general contractors or the safety contractor that they've hired to look over their sites are putting increased requirements on the trades and distribution that are going into these locations. And so they're looking for certifications that traditionally people didn't always have in the distribution side of the business. Or if you were a contractor working with general laborers, making sure that they're doing things like an OSHA 10 or an OSHA 30 just to apply drywall or do some basic construction. So it's interesting that that's a movement. I think it's great.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks. TJ, you can go to the next slide. Yeah, I think fantastic point. And I think to your point, I'm also seeing that not just in crane operations, but kind of extending out into other roles, is there is this sort of increased focus on what sort of training you have. Have you been qualified? What did that look like? Are you certified? So absolutely some increased focus there from employers. Um, the open-ended responses that I mentioned also revealed some key challenges and some opportunities for maybe improvement, either from certifying bodies in ways that we sort of address certification. And the first is certification versus competency, right? So vast majority of the responses I got were that certification is effective at creating a baseline of knowledge, right? Of teaching personnel, maybe the more technical side of crane operations. How do you read a load chart? What is the effect of a sling angle on the load? What capacity can, the crane handle? But experience and mentorship are really what drive safety. So I was kind of surprised by this finding. I was wholly expecting people to just kind of say, no, it's really only experience that matters. But I was kind of surprised to see that that baseline knowledge is so, so important. And standardizing that knowledge is, I think, where certification is coming in the strongest to improve safety, is you're having personnel who have the same amount of training, that have the same information, that have learned in a similar environment. And this comes up a little bit later that I'll talk about, but in discrepancies between, say, signaling, standard signaling versus non-standard signaling, and how important that is to communication. But we're having, personnel who come on who maybe don't know standard signals or have only dealt with non-standard signals. Or the opposite, where they were trained a certain way and they come on and the operator has used these signals for so long that they're kind of forced to kind of change their approach to things. So, that standardization and that baseline knowledge is really, really important. Another barrier was, or another challenge are the barriers to certification. So there were some folks that had concerns that maybe the costs and testing requirements could disadvantage some qualified workers. So a couple examples were, if there's a really skilled, a really skilled operator who then had to become certified but struggles with written test taking. So some of the recommendations were, how can we tailor these toward, multilingual crews? How can we make sure we're reaching folks who maybe aren't the same literacy rate or don't speak the same language? So just recommendations were really, how can we expand this out to make it equitable amongst workers? Again, job site pressures were overriding training. So new workers may deviate from their training to conform with site norms. As I mentioned, that signaling was one issue that came up again and again, both in the responses and the interviews. And I have a quote that I can actually read to you in the next slide, but keep that in the back of your minds. And then another challenge is qualified versus certified. So again, that variation is leading to inconsistent competency and really inconsistent safety across job sites. And TJ, you can go next.
I think you have some great points there that are we see every day in challenges, not just within our own company, but the trades that we interact with. Each one of those has its own weight into how do you level set the information? How do you overcome bad practices and get people to participate across all those different barriers. So you hit it right on the head.
And I'm curious, Matt, do you see or have you heard um particularly around the how it could potentially disadvantage some employees? Have you kind of run across that, and what are your thoughts on that?
So it is a challenge, and we find three real challenges to people who are. One is the language barrier you talked about. If English is not your primary language and the test is only in English, that could be difficult. Learning styles. Are learning styles changing more from the written word in the manuals and the technical writings that we have to more of a YouTube style audio visual? And so, regardless of your language, if you're looking to give them that technical information, they struggle to digest it properly. And then the third part is testing. They might understand the information, they might know how to do the job, but when it comes to testing, they weren't good test takers when they had to take tests. Particularly in our business, we see over the road operators who come to us and then they want to learn how to operate a crane and they haven't taken a test in 30 years. And they struggle with the actual test taking itself. And so all three of those components, kind of identifying what the needs of the individual are to help support them, is what we do within our own company. And yeah, but we see each one of those struggles, and it's different for each individual. It's not a one size fits all.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm glad you touched on I think there's a pretty large generational shift that we're seeing right now in how people are reacting to training. I know even on in our own research and our own approaches, we've been kind of emphasizing micro trainings and trying to
Yeah.
keep it really short and digestible, and yeah, but um
Without a
yeah,
doubt, that is the how we communicate. So I think it's important. The certification sets that standard. This is the information. These are the rules. This is how we do it. It's the piece connecting the technical to the individual, that communication around it. And how do we get it to not be noise and still be supportive? If it's demonstrative in nature, never do that. They're going to be like, I don't like listen, I don't like being told what to do. And you're like, okay, so how do I get them to use those things that we taught them to realize that's there to protect them? And I think that goes hand in hand with what you're seeing. The commercial requirements to be certified are holding people accountable to the behaviors. So nobody wants to get hurt, but every time somebody's running behind, they cut a corner that puts them at risk. Now, holding them accountable to a certain level helps weed out, I think, the bad behaviors over time. Is some of that. It's kind of.
absolutely. Yeah, and we actually got some feedback that was very similar to that with one of our interviews who said, it's just sort of another way to make sure there's some sort of standard of professionalism with these individuals that kind of helps make it, not only something, not just a job, right? I think the intention is also to give you something to have pride in, that you've put in all this work, you have this knowledge, you were able to pass this test.
We find that we have a field team that came from our terminals. They're CDL operators, CCO is certified, and so they are experts at how to do the job. If they can't communicate to the individual they're trying to help, it doesn't do any good. And that's that key component. So even the people that you interviewed, they are tremendously technical and do a great job, but they're where they're at because they do that great job and they do exhibit safety behaviors. Getting them to communicate those to other individuals is a whole other challenge that, depending on who their mentor was or their management, if that becomes an obstacle in itself, that perpetuating those good behaviors and explaining why, uh, somebody says, you just don't do it that way. And that becomes almost another barrier on top of not just the language, it's the effective communication between individuals. And we see that when it's done well, it cuts out those bad behaviors. And when it's not done well, people pick up their own bad habits, and then other people see it and learn from those. So,
Yep. Yep. And I think you transitioned to my quote here perfectly, which is you teach them properly, then they get on site with an operator who's been in the seat for 20, 25 years. Next, they're signaling the way the crane operator wants them to do it. So
mhm.
I think, your point is perfect. And a lot of the recommendations, the insights that we got both from the survey and the interviews we did, we're all emphasizing how important that mentorship is. But I think to your point, that can be sort of that double-edged sword where they come on with these folks who are very experienced, but if they are used to doing it, in a way that maybe isn't the most safety sensitive, right? Are they going to pick up those habits? And how do we make sure that we can, mentor them with individuals who share that safety mindset, make sure we're pairing them up correctly. But
And it's safety mindset. It's one of those things when we hear companies all the time. We had safety month, and everybody was putting out videos and said, we got to send our people home the same way they came to us. Well, that's great. Everybody thinks that. But what do we do today to make sure that that happened? And therein lies the real challenge of, as individuals, taking action. It doesn't have to be big, giant movements. It's small pieces. It's checking on a driver before he gets into an 80,000-pound truck. It's asking someone to double check a couple of pieces or coming up with a game plan before you actually start doing the construction activity at a job site. And so those small moments have bigger impact. And so the safety mindset, I believe, is there. Nobody wants to get hurt. Nobody wants to see their people get hurt. I don't want to get hurt. But every time I cut a corner, I put myself at risk. Am I thinking of it in that fashion? And unfortunately, that's where the communication piece is even more so. And it takes leadership because leaders exhibit those qualities of authenticity, of communication, responsibility, do what you say you would do, walk the walk, talk the talk, right? All those things that are components of being a leader. When we look to somebody who's a leader and then they are safe on top of it, people absorb those things. And so communication and focusing on that piece that you're not going to find that in a book. That's not in a technical manual. You'll never find in your crane operator's manual, like make sure you communicate really effectively with your people on the team. But it
absolutely.
ties those two pieces together.
Yeah, yeah, and some other kind of spoiling the next report a little bit, but
I'm
like a
sorry.
lot of the no, it's okay. A lot of the challenges that we saw were also around the employer culture and putting a lot of pressure on meeting time schedules, making sure you're meeting production demands. So, how do you balance out that efficiency with that safety and still make sure that safety mindset is hopefully taking precedence without impacting efficiency to the point where, it's a detriment, but
Yeah, I do. I see that all the time when I talk to people because I'm actually traditionally I'm from the operations side of our business. And so I was very safe. I had very good generative safety businesses that I participated in at an individual level. And then what I realized is that when you're participating at that level, you have that safety mindset. Now translating that, I had a thought and it disappeared on me. Dag nabbit. That
no,
it
you're
it
good. No, I think are you if I'm understanding correctly, like how do you translate safety impacts as operational impacts, right? Because I mean, chances
oh
are
that's
the safer your crew is, hopefully the less near
right.
misses, the less incidents you have.
The more best practices you follow, the less downtime on your equipment, on the job site, on your
Absolutely.
people, which actually is improved uptime. That's where
Absolutely.
I was going. So we always had that high efficiency because we did things the right way, not realizing that people think you have to take off your productivity hat to put your safety hat on. And I'm like, that's the only time when you're probably doing safety wrong. It's one hat. You do them together. And actually, if you're wearing your safety hat more often, your production's better. It's when it slips, and identifying those things like you didn't give the team enough time impacts, because now they don't have enough time, so they cut a step. That's when the risk comes in. Now there's downtime, whether it's on a line or in a manufacturing site or a job site. And people don't think of it that way. They always deal with the fire after the fact instead of preventing it ahead of time. But that's our job in safety, is to help enlighten people.
Absolutely. Part of that communication. Absolutely. And TJ, you can go to the next slide. Last question we wanted to address was, where does certification make the biggest impact? So along with perceptions, doing some of that statistical work, we wanted to know, where were the greatest gains in confidence? So the same way we asked, are certified riggers more effective at this competency? We also asked, after certification, whether they saw, an increase in confidence or not. What we saw is that, and I don't think that this is super surprising, is that certification is most effective for standardized and knowledge-based competencies, right? So for operators, things like hazard identification, interpreting load charts, setup, site evaluation. For riggers, it was selection and use of rigging hardware and slings, anticipating unsafe conditions. And then for signal people, it was, sort of along the same lines of anticipating hazards and maintaining communication. Where we see greater reliance on experience and on the job training is for things like coordination with crew, the communication aspect, it's actually the safe handling, so manually operating the crane. For riggers, it was proper use of below the hook devices, application of standard hitches, and load weight estimations. So things that, are sort of a case-by-case basis, require a little bit more reliance on mentorship and experience. And then for signal persons, it was non-standard site signaling. So we saw that certified versus non-certified signal people maybe weren't as confident with non-standard signals. And TJ and I went back and forth a little bit about, whether or not that is the purpose of certification, right? Is the purpose to teach that you're going to encounter these non-standard signals, or is it on the employer to make sure they're relying on standard signals? So we had a little bit of a chicken before the egg situation. But I think what we landed on with non-standard signaling is that, workers are coming onto these sites knowing those standard signals. We've had, some concerns around more experienced personnel who signal a certain way. And our research has found that that is contributing to safety issues. So I think we landed on, obviously where possible, applying those standard signals, and not necessarily making that a certification requirement. And
Yeah.
TJ, you can go to the next slide. And this brings me to some key recommendations. So wrapping up, Matt, before I pass it over to you. So recommendations for employers, operators, whoever you are listening out there, is to position certification, again, as that sort of foundational step. So pair it where you can with on-the-job training. I know mentorship programs, in certain industries have fallen pretty significantly. So if you can, try to create some of those mentorship opportunities. How can you help develop those sorts of early career operators, riggers, and signal people? And how can we explore pathways that maybe formally recognize both experience and certification? So that was another bit of feedback that I've got is, folks don't want, someone completely green coming on site who's certified and thinks that they know it all, right? Just like you don't want anyone to come onto the site and assume that they are the absolute expert. How can we explore pathways that recognize you are certified, but you also have this great field experience to back that up? Expand certification thoughtfully. So consider certification in your hiring decisions, in your development programs. How can you maybe support certification for those personnel who aren't currently certified on your job site? For trainers and certification organizations, how can we strengthen that training again for complex and non-standard tasks? Or how can we pair the certification again with on-the-job training to prepare new personnel for complex tasks or more site-by-site different activities that maybe are a little bit harder to train on? TJ, you can go next slide. Reduce barriers to certification. Matt touched on a couple of different things that we can do to sort of expand some of those affordable resources. How can we make it more affordable? Are there ways that we can do maybe flexible testing pathways? How can we sort of reduce those barriers again without compromising on the rigor of the certification itself? Another area that came up was lift planning. So some organizations are doing their formal lift planning before every critical lift. Some have a much more flying by the seat of their pants approach to lift planning. So this is one really easy suggestion I can give, is to just make sure that you're enforcing your lift planning standards. Make sure you're communicating. If you're going to be signaling a certain way, make sure everybody is aware of how you are signaling. And then reduce variability where possible. So if you can expand your training materials to make sure you're meeting multilingual crews, make sure that your training, your certification, or your qualification is sort of meeting industry standards. And then again, how can we make that shift to qualification to more standardized training or certification? And TJ, that's it from me. Matt, I believe you are up.
Great. And I think I have what I'd like to talk about, not just strictly ABC supply, but I've took over the safety department just about 5 years ago from a gentleman who was trained by the FBI in explosives, was a fire chief, a police captain, and he was very safety one minded. He built our safety department from the ground up. The policy, procedure, education, and training was great. He could recite the law verbatim, and that was amazing. We had tremendous confidence in him. When I took over, what I realized is when somebody's slipping on a roof, nobody's looking for a quick guide. And so how do we get people to remember the things we taught them was kind of our journey. And so I think that the path that I've taken our safety team on over the last 4 to 5 years is a lot of the case study that you have, and it's supportive of those things. We're super supportive of the NCCCO Foundation. We participate in as many of the programs that coincide with our business. Not all of them do, but when they do, we want to participate. We're members of the National Safety Council. And so I share this not to grandize ABC, but I think that there's a key struggle that safety personnel have in connecting the rules of law and certification to the individual and behaviors, which are two real extremes. And how do we get both of those to kind of coincide is a challenge that we face all the time. And so when I took over our safety department, there was it wasn't a big department. Our job was to make sure that we had the education and training was in place and that we met compliance metrics, and we took it very seriously. And like I said, most people don't think that they want their people to get hurt, that we do the education and training and it's good. How do we make it effective? And so we've grown to over 1,000 branch locations. So we're very decentralized. That's its own challenge. If you're in a factory and everybody's under one roof, different than if you've got 20 locations or 10 locations, or you're a general contractor that's got job sites around the country. With 20,000 associates, you get varied behavior, tribal knowledge, across all the different roles that we have. And then we have 18,000 pieces of equipment in total. About 2,500 of those are cranes. We have mostly articulating booms, either loaders or articulating boom cranes, articulating boom loaders, drywalls and knuckles. We do have some cable cranes, but that's a minority of our business. And we're 20,000 job sites a day. With that comes 20,000 individual locations, each with their own hazards. And so how do we collect all that information and then help people protect themselves? So we took the education and safety. We realized that the leadership and communication was the key components to having success when it comes to safety behaviors. So we wholeheartedly participate in certification of our cranes. Every individual that operates a boom truck or a crane at ABC has crane certification, and it really has set that base level of information, the professional minimums that people need to know to carry that card. And it's a standard that we get to hold to people, not just when there's an incident, but when we're teaching best practice, in that this was part of their education and certification. This is why these things are in place. And we lead with why an awful lot there, because we find that just the rules alone don't yield the result. Understanding why the rules there is really what has precipitated reduction of injuries and incidents. If you go to the next slide for me. So the key things that particularly for the crane operator training program, we as a distributor, we deliver last mile. Crane operators are the lifeblood of our operation. 70% of what we sell is delivered. 70% of that is done on boom trucks. And so identifying the obstacles to certification also provided us with the opportunities to create better training. And we feel that if the safety department can be supportive of not just being legal, but being safe operators, that's a win. And so we realized that because we hold certification events uh, I have a field team, and they are all certified to be proctors for practical or the knowledge examinations, that we continue seeing the challenges that show up with people that come to take the test. Number one is they're not prepared. And so we actually partnered with one of our crane manufacturers on developing a virtual reality crane training simulator. And with that, it helps them understand the controller better so that they can actually get better instruction on the machine. We find that that's been amazing. One, people pass the test because they're not fighting the controller when they go to take their exam. And at the same time, they get better instruction from that senior guy who has already got his certification on how to use the equipment, not which button to push to make it do something. The field team is also being experts on the equipment. They will do hands-on training if we have individuals that are stuck or we don't have somebody who's a good mentor in that realm. We will have somebody come out and spend one-on-one time at job sites with utilizing the equipment that these individuals are going to be using. From the knowledge side, we have what we call a core pack. It's the written materials. It's the NCCCO Articulating Boom Reference Manual. We have an ABC version, which is also the PowerPoint that we share with people. It takes a lot of the information in the CCO manual and makes it easier to digest. So we've got people that struggle to learn. That we find is a little bit easier. Same information, a little different format. We also put some practice exams in there. We have a skills list, which is a guide for the senior operator, possibly the manager and the new person. It's a series of bullet pointed lists to help them get on the same page with communication. So if that senior operator hasn't trained anybody in a long time, what are the things they should be talking about? They don't have to come up with it on their own. So we've actually seen upticks in the knowledge just by releasing the core pack. The last piece that's just coming out in the next couple of weeks is going to be, we took that very same core pack information and created YouTube style video modules within our learning management system. So we've seen people take to the core pack and the written information. Now we're going to apply these video modules, and not just the video modules, but the questions that are in the video modules, point them back to the reference material. And then that way they see it and hear it. They find it in the reference material. They write their answer down in a workbook. They rinse and repeat that through a series of modules. In total, it's about an hour, 4 minutes a piece per video. And with that, we really hope to strengthen the information in the knowledge base, because we feel if we can build this program, not only will people be happy because they get a certified operator, from the safety side, we're more confident that they are a better operator than they were 2 years ago, 5 years ago. Next slide, please. The key component to a lot of the success from the safety department at ABC, from taking over the safety department, it took a couple of years to build our team. When I took it over, there were only 6 field team associates, and they were involved training one-on-one, usually with people looking to learn the crane. 3 years ago, we actually saw our fall incidents go down 10%. And then last year, we actually saw a 30% reduction in falls and a 10% injury rate reduction overall. And so this year, we're actually at a 28% reduction from last year. So we think that we've got a secret sauce here, and that is our field team. So we use them. They get to over 400 over 1,000 terminals a year. They will do crane training, new vehicle orientation. So if we send out a new boom truck and it's got bells and whistles that you haven't seen before, instead of somebody not understanding how to use the equipment, we teach them exactly how it operates. They're intimate with the vehicles because they all were operators and CDL licensed drivers. And so they can look at the equipment and understand, are we getting bad service on our equipment? Is there an issue with the equipment, or is it the user himself who's abusing the equipment, either because they just don't understand how to use it properly, or they're cutting corners. Facility reviews, equipment training, anything that is non-standard. So these guys all go through an OSHA 10 or 30 program. We do communication courses, leadership development, and they are that key component between the rules and certification and the behavior at a job site. And I mentioned earlier that one of the key things is when they're working with an individual, whether they had an incident or not, to say, I'm here to support you. Our job is to make sure that you understand how to keep yourself safe. And so we peeled a lot of the safety things that we've got our manuals and our education training, which is that's the Bible that we live by. But we've made supplementary safety things. We've changed our safety meetings to be easier, more digestible. We've gone back to the ABCs of certain safety procedures, such as fall protection, inspect your equipment, inspect the job site, anchor, attach. If you do those 3 things, you're going to be safe. Identifying the hazards and coming up with a game plan. I use it all the time, and I say, your football team, do you want them to go out on Sunday and not have a game plan? Or would you rather them get together beforehand, talk about the plan of attack, and move forward with that? Which one's going to yield better success? And they go, okay, got your point. And so trying to get people to think in those very basic terms and then be supportive by somebody like our field team is really, I think, what's moved the needle over the last couple of years, particularly from an injury. We see response from crane operators, particularly. We were getting information on the booms that they weren't using the controller properly. We had a campaign. We went out and hit the top 50 stores that were throwing alerts, and we reduced the alerts by 45% in the back half of a year, which was an amazing number. So the communication efforts is really what's yielding that piece. And what I find is that management is a lot of times busy running the business. They're not thinking of how to be good communicators to safety sensitive personnel. And the safety sensitive personnel who's often at the job site or in a different location, that they often feel like they're on their own. So how do we found this method of communication has really supported both ends of the business. The management invites us in because we're producing results and we're getting great responses from the drivers. They're happy to see us. And so both of those really in combination is where we see this rubber hit the road. So it's been a tremendous journey over the last several years, but a lot of the things that are in your paper are exactly what's been going on in our business. And so any safety people that are listening and wondering how they can replicate those things, I spend more time in leadership and mentoring than I do safety. And use the tools we have and figure out how to connect those two. So
That's excellent advice, Matt. I appreciate that. And thanks, Kenna, for your overview. I know we're running up on time, but I think we do have some questions and wanted to just take a couple minutes to get your response from it. Again, the information that you shared, Kenna, I think is a great we'll call it roadmap or advice there. And it sounds like Matt, you've had a lot of success in actually implementing some of these things just on your own and doing some of the stuff before this, and now we've got a little bit of more evidence there to back up the stuff that you're already doing, and then your success kind of doubles down on the fact that it's important. Um, so one of the questions that came in here, kind of, which I think it's for you first, which when you were going through the fatality rates, was there any difference between mobile crane operations and fixed or fixed building cranes, is what as they term it here? Could you tell?
Yes. So, not from that specific analysis, but looking at the other research, there's a pretty substantial difference. Mobile cranes are generally going to have the higher fatality rates, just by the nature of cranes over tipping, electrocution. Whereas tower cranes they're less often to happen, but when they do happen, they tend to be more catastrophic, so usually structural collapses. But generally mobile cranes have the higher rate.
Gotcha. Thanks. And then Matt, here's one for you. Do you have any advice for small employers who may not have as many resources as ABC does? Where can they start? What should they really focus on if you don't have a lot of resources or smaller op?
Not having a lot of resources, that's where an organization like the National Safety Council comes in. We look at them as a partner, and we refer to the National Safety Council a lot. One, I don't have to think of everything myself. I can rely on people who do this all the time. And if we've got the same answers, great. Even if we don't, or I learn something new, even better. So that's a great resource for smaller companies. And then the advice of just focus on the communication as well as managing the team is a key component. We can't forget about that. Those companies take the productivity hat, safety hat. It's one, right? And that's a challenge to individuals.
That's good advice. Yeah, there are other resources out there to help start, especially those you can't do it internally, and just starting there, I think, is a good advice. One of the other things that I wanted to ask Matt, which is, I'm sure you do get pushback from people on all sides, right? If it's the employees or the management side, kind of on, I'd rather be spending time being productive and doing the job, and why are we taking valuable time out from we can be producing more, but we're spending it on safety. And we think you touched on a little bit earlier, but what kind of things? How do you combat that? What's your answer to somebody that says like less training is fine, we can do the minimum and let's move on. We'll make be more productive that way.
Yeah, I think when people think of having to do safety, or that production idea is some like old 80s videos that were laborious to get through, making the education uh, not just such a slog. That you get pushback all the time. I want to add another course. And so it'll even from leadership or the operation goes, oh, you're adding another course. Have you considered what this does to the business? I said, yeah, but I also took our fall protection video and made it better. And I saved you overall 10 minutes. So I need you to add this 3-minute course. Micro learning, as Kenna had talked about earlier, making it easier. And when those objections come up, they're not usually current objections, they're old objections. And in getting them to see that we're trying to do things differently, make it less painful, it's in the interest of the individual and their operation. And by highlighting those benefits and showing that we're making progress, they go, okay, I hadn't thought of it that way. So yeah, there's pressure from everybody.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of pressure out there. Um, and I'd see one other question here related to contact information. Yeah, I'll be happy to share people's contact information if Matt and Kenna, you're okay with that. If you email me at the foundation NCC info at ncccofoundation.org. Again, happy to share that. I'll also be sharing a recording of this video with everybody who's registered for it, and the general public out there. One last kind of thing there, just wanted to hit on a thing. If anything in particular for this question for both you, Kenna and Matt, again, anything in particular from the research, the findings and the recommendations that came out that you thought was most interesting or wanted to kind of re-emphasize, I guess, before we wrap it up here.
The thing from the training that I saw was that the challenges are exactly what we're seeing in the field. It was a super well done report. It discusses all the things that really need addressing on the day to day, and people, as you encounter them, are not alone. And so that's where I offer my assistance in just talking it through, knowing it's not a one size fits all. And so I'm more than happy to participate. But the report was amazingly correct. So I wholly support it, and anything we can do to move safety forward is good for everybody.
Oh, thanks for that, man. I'm sure Kenna appreciates that too.
Definitely do. Definitely do. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, and I would say from my perspective, I saw, I think it was 70% come through, right, who have more than a decade of experience. And I was kind of fully preparing myself for no experience trumps everything. Certification is just more bureaucracy. So I was, pleasantly surprised to see the pretty positive reaction to certification. And again, I think, to sort of echo Matt's point, I think in identifying some of those challenges, some of those ways that we can improve, it's just going to keep pushing that needle on safety moving forward. And I think another, finding both from that report and the one we're going to release in about a month was how important employer culture is to that, how important leadership reinforcement is to that. So just not only making sure that, you're training and reinforcing it, but how are you supporting them in their day to day? And again, making sure things like production pressures, timing is not interfering with safety.
All right. All right. Well, that's a good lead into my wrap up there, Kenna, is to give a highlight. I wanted to again thank both of you for taking your time and providing your expertise and information. Note that we are I think it's gonna be September 29th. We're gonna have the next webinar that's going to be focused on rigging, the state of rigging and signaling in the industry and its impact on safety. I know that you kind of gave a little preview today of some of those things, but we're going to dive deeper into that and discuss like what's going on out there, what are some of the dangers and the reasons why we should be concerned about it, and how we can take some steps to help address those safety issues. Again, that's in September, and then in October we'll be doing something on assembly and disassembly safety. So I invite everybody to check those out. Again, you can kind of see our upcoming ones and then register for ones at our website, NCCCOFoundation.org. And we'll be sending out a survey right after this for everybody who participated. Please take a couple minutes to fill out that survey. We'd love to hear your feedback, get some thoughts on other useful topics that we might be able to do in the future. We're doing one per month usually. And so we're always looking for new interesting topics. But again, thank you everybody who attended. Thank you again to Matt and Kenna for all your great information and for helping to improve safety in the industry. That's what we're here for, and really appreciate your support on that. So everybody have a great rest of the day, and thanks again for attending. Take care. Thank you.